Hello and welcome to After Scientology, Straight Up and Vertical, the weekly show that Tony Ortega and I do to talk about, discuss, review, and break down the stories over the last week that Tony reported on his Substack. Hey, Tony, welcome back to the show.
Thank you very much, Chris. As you can see, I'm in a different location this time.
Yes, having some personal time.
I'm on a bike tour. I'm in a hotel in Rhode Island.
Oh, wow. Awesome. Well, it has been quite a week and quite an interesting week of reporting. And I'm just going to say we got Tony's Substack there on the front. If you're not subscribed, you really should. These are just fascinating stories from all different angles on Scientology. Starting with something I'm really going to need you to explain because it's just old and convoluted and a crazy ass story. But this Rizza Islam guy and his whole case, we track it for years, and then it's dismissed this week. What is up?
It's such a mystery, Chris, because what I remember was Jeffrey Augustine was good enough to go down to the courthouse one day for us and sit and listen to the preliminary hearing. This was like 3 or 4 years ago. I mean, I first broke the news of these arrests in 2015. And Jeffrey was there as the state laid out its case. And it's this fascinating scheme that Hanan Islam was apparently the, ringleader, where they had corrupted some high school principals that were sending over high school students to pretend that they were drug addicts that needed to go through Narcanon. And according to the state, in court, they said that Rizza's part of the scheme was he corralled these ghostwriters who would then write these fake, treatment, they narratives of how these students had gone through this Narcanon treatment, and then they would bill the state. So, everybody was in on it. These high school principals were in on it. Hanan and several of her kids working out of this World Literacy Crusade in Compton. For 3 years, they were accused of stealing about $4 million from the state of California. Rizza's two sisters pled guilty. The other two counselors who were not in the family pled guilty. The two principals and a football coach all lost their jobs and pled to misdemeanors.
Wow.
Hanan Islam died of cancer waiting for trial. That just left Rizza. Now, it was obvious he was only charged with, I think, 2 counts. His mother was charged with 3. His mother already had previous felonies. She had probably been looking at a pretty serious case. His case wasn't as serious, but, the state had all this evidence, they said. And, Jeffrey's been keeping an eye on it for us, and he was saying that just the week before, the prosecution said they were ready to go. Something happened over the weekend, Chris, and this trial, which had been delayed and delayed and delayed, finally, Monday morning, the government, the state, came to the court and said, we're not ready to proceed, drop charges. And of course, Rizza himself is now, I understand. He's calling himself Rizza Case Dismissed Islam. He's putting out T-shirts and everything, and he's vowing to go after me and other people that wrote about him. But look, there's just no question. The state spent a lot of time and money prosecuting this case. And the state attorney general was asked about this and put out a quote saying that, well, we did get some convictions. Yeah, they got some minor figures pled to misdemeanors. So I don't know. I don't know what happened, Chris. I have no idea. It's very, look, I talked to a prosecutor who said, what can happen at the last second is a key witness. See, it's not just that you need to show that the state lost money. It's not just that you would have witnesses who would describe the high school students being used. You would need a witness that would specifically be able to describe what Rizza's part of the scheme was. And maybe that witness backed out at the last minute. You know what I'm saying? We don't know. So he's celebrating. I don't blame him. I'd celebrate if I was him too. But
Wow.
It's a mystery because there's no question that was a Scientology Narcanon style rehab working out of a notorious Scientology front group there in Compton. It's now gone.
How interesting. And of course, it's so easy to jump to the conspiratorial type or bribery type or fair game type answer for this, when we have to be real and say could be a laundry list of reasons this case could have been dismissed, but it doesn't make sense in light of all the things you just said. It definitely puts a cloud over the whole thing and makes me wonder immediately about either Scientology or other corrupt money influence. I mean, how could you not? Ugh.
And he's such an interesting figure himself, because he's also Nation of Islam. In fact, I think he's more associated with Nation of Islam and kind of has stepped away from Scientology. But also, just a year or two ago, he was named one of the 12 biggest sources of disinformation about vaccines online in the country. So, yeah, I mean, he's become kind of notorious while waiting for this trial. And now let's see, I'm sure he's going to try to use that notoriety even more.
Well, clearly, has he been selling? I'm just curious because it tends to be a thing amongst the anti-vax community. Is he making a bundle off supplements and other alternative medical efforts?
I don't, his website has these very expensive things you can sign up. I think he tends to sell more sort of life coaching kind of stuff.
Got it. He's on that trajectory. Okay. Yeah, the NOI it's not like the NOI is a whole lot better than Scientology, and in fact, in some ways, significantly worse. Okay, well, moving on to the next story here. There was bombshell reporting that actually got picked up by a lot of media, which was I've been butchering this man's name, and I publicly apologize for doing so. Yashar Ali's reporting. I know the guy on Twitter. I respect his work. Anyway, he had a big bombshell on basically a Where's Shelly report. Take it away.
Yeah, really, really good work. I mean, just amazing. I in my piece about it, I tried to set up the context that, look, a lot of us have been reporting on Shelly for a long time, and back in 2013, Leah Remini came out that summer, and a month later filed a missing person report. That's a story I broke in August 2013. And some people wonder if the LAPD even met with Shelly, but I did talk to a lieutenant at that time, Lieutenant Andre Dawson, who told me two of his detectives had met with Shelly. And he wouldn't tell me where, but I asked him, did this meeting take place in the presence of other Church of Scientology officials? And he said, that's classified. So I've reported that years ago, and I've said, I don't know where that meeting took place. I thought, it's kind of incredible to think that the LAPD sent detectives up to Twin Peaks. I didn't know where that meeting might have taken place. So now what Yashar has found is that meeting did take place in a coffee shop in West Covina, and that Shelly was accompanied by Jeffrey Riffer. Jeffrey Riffer is David Miscavige's personal attorney. All right. And he also reported that they took a fingerprint, but they might have been a little sloppy with it. And it didn't conclusively match what was before. I think this is a little bit of a red herring. I mean, I think there's no doubt it was Shelly. The question, but Yashar, the point Yashar makes that's really good is that there's no follow-up. They just shelved it as, everything's okay. They never told Leah Remini a thing, even though Leah Remini was the one who filed the missing person report. That's the thing that galls me the most, is that, 3 years later in 2016, Leah had to file a records request with an attorney just to try to get, she had never even been told the result of that missing person report. They told the LAPD told the press, but they never told Leah anything. She tried to get information, and the LAPD told her, no, you're not getting any information. So now, thanks to Yashar, we have a lot more information about that meeting. Also, he was able to get her 2010 driver's license renewal, also in West Covina, and got her driver's license photo. And that is the first photograph of Shelly Miscavige since her disappearance in 2005. So that's really significant. And I think most people are having the same reaction. She looks defeated. The history of that is that Mitch Brisker, who you interviewed, saw Shelly in 2008. Then there was this 2010 driver's license where she doesn't look too happy. And then I talked to a woman up in Crestline that believes she saw Shelly in town in 2015 and 2016. That's not confirmed, but I take it seriously. And she said Shelly looked awful. So, and that's the last anybody has seen her. That's the last legitimate sighting of Shelly is 2016. So 7 years ago. So that photo I thought really is hitting people like, wow, she does not look good.
Yeah, of course.
And I mean, I know people, and Yashar made the point in his piece that the number one question we all get is where's Shelly? It's a great question, but we know where she is, Chris. We know where she's at. She's at the CST headquarters compound, a little compound up near Lake Arrowhead. She's been there the whole time since they took her up there in 2005. She's been up there 18 years coming this August. So, and there's public records. I mean, I'm going to be talking about this some more. I'm getting some more information, but anyway, just a fantastic piece by Yashar. And yes, as you notice, it got picked up all over the place. And then Leah followed that up with a tweet you may have seen where she and Claire Headley met with the chief of police on Monday. And I'm sure they had a lot to talk about because they not only had this to talk about, like, obviously your investigation of Shelly was just half-assed, but also, Poboreski. I'm sure, I'm assuming that Leah and Claire asked Chief Moore about Vicky Poboreski getting a meeting with him and, explaining to him how just ridiculous this is, that Scientology is trying to use the evidence from the criminal case. It's just insane. So hopefully she talked about that too. But anyway, it's great that Leah is keeping this on the front burner like that. I think it's building momentum, and at some point you would think somebody's going to have to do something about checking on her.
It would be time. It has been enough years, and we did a live stream on my channel this week about this report, and I had the pleasure of having John Poe on, who was a former police chief, who, had some things to talk about in regards to the police procedure and answering questions about certain things that may or may not actually end up being, really suspicious. But at the end of the day, this is a massive story. And of course, Shelly Miscavige has been the object of David Miscavige's cruelty for the last 18 years, being exiled to this location and all the rest. I mean, this is the epitome of Scientology in a hashtag. It really kind of accomplishes that. And she doesn't, and all. One point to make about Shelly, and I talked about this on my live stream today, was Shelly was not ever noted for her cruelty. There's a lot of people who have Shelly as David Miscavige's wife, and does she, and what did she contribute to all this? And as much as anybody else did, but she was never a cruel person. Nobody has ever accused her of that, of all the people who know her.
I talked to people who worked with her who said that she could be harsh. She could be harsh like Dave. But what I also heard from people that worked with her was she was something of an ameliorating force.
Right.
So, for example, Dave would come in and cause total havoc, physically beat people, scream at people, and then walk out. And then she would be there. Are you okay? And she would try to calm things down. She would move people in different assignments so that they wouldn't have contact with Dave. I mean, I think there was no doubt that while she could be a hard ass executive in her own right, because she had to be, because it was the Sea Org, she was more of a calming force around Dave.
Exactly. And for the last 18 years, she hasn't been. And I think some of the results are the results that we have. It's been interesting.
Good point. Yeah.
Okay. So then we had what I thought was some really interesting, I was intriguing writing from John Atack, contributing an article about Charles Manson and his involvement with Scientology. And I'm going to say this is something I have been meaning to dive into for years. Never had the time to go get the whole Manson story. John's known it. He put it all down there in writing, and it was fascinating to read. in critiquing this other new book about Manson. What were your thoughts on this whole thing?
Yeah, I mean, I've written a little bit about Manson and Scientology myself. I really like the Jeff Gwynne book. The Jeff Gwynne biography of Manson came out 8 or 9 years ago. I highly recommend it, and it does touch on the Scientology. Um, and of course, John knows it very well. But what John was reacting to was this newer book makes some claims about Jolly West, this academic who was very critical of Scientology, was harassed by Scientology. And John took some exception to that, and he said that the biggest problem with O'Neill's book was that it ignored Scientology. Now, I've heard from O'Neill. I may have a response from him. And the one thing he told me was that he thought too much time had passed between the Scientology that Manson did in prison and then the family and the murders. But I'm not sure that that's a very long time. I mean, if Charlie Manson did 150 hours of auditing in prison in 1962, the fact that the family committed those murders in 1969 doesn't seem like a long span of time to me, because I'm familiar with how long Scientology has a grip on the mind. And so, maybe it's just that Mr. O'Neill's not that familiar with Scientology and the effects it has. I mean, doesn't that sound like, I mean, you would know better than me. If Charlie got that much auditing in 62, don't you think it would still be influencing him in 69?
Well, I would absolutely say it could have been an influence on him up to 1969. It would be unusual if it wasn't, especially given his behavior and what Scientology auditing actually is at its core. So, yeah, there's absolutely a case to be made. Let's put it that way. Right? To deny it, to refute it like that, to simply say, oh, well, it was 7 years ago, no big deal. Is he thinking this is the same thing as a Christian revivalism or a sort of, some kind of, I saw the light. Oh, yeah, well, that was 7 years ago. A lot of water's gone under the bridge. And he doesn't understand it's a psychological operation. It's not a religious experience.
Right. I don't know. I hope. I have asked him to send me a response. I told him I'd be happy to publish it. So we'll see what he decides to do. But anyway, John Attak's article was hugely popular at the bunker. People love it when he does these kind of deep dives. And he has so many facts at his fingertips. And so then I had him on my podcast. We talked about it even further. So that was fun. But yeah, I mean, there's just no question that Charlie Manson had some substantial involvement in Scientology. And I think Jeff Gwynne made a good case in his book that it was definitely part of the philosophy then he then put together that built the family.
That's right.
That definitely contributed to it. So and you always see this meme on the internet that Scientology was too crazy for Charlie Manson. Let that sink in. And I hate that meme because the opposite is true. Scientology wasn't crazy enough for Charlie Manson. That's why he went looking for other things to add to it.
Exactly. We can certainly see it, and for whatever doubters or whatever out there, or people who are going to be snarky. Let's put it this way, right? It's not that Scientology makes everybody into Charles Manson, but Scientology sure as hell didn't cure Charlie Manson. Now, did it? Didn't touch his psychosis.
Yeah.
So, what are we supposed to say, right? And again, I'm going to really pimp that article because I learned so much about Jolly West in that article. Real breakdown, and I'm going to tell you that as a former Scientologist from the 80s and 90s, when they were really anti-psych. I mean, their tune hasn't changed, but the intensity of it has gone way down compared to how it was back in the 80s and 90s. And I'm saying that from having been there at that time, both as a public, staff, and Sea Org member. Oh man, they really were pouring the coals on then. And Jolly West's name came up almost every time out of Mike Rinder's lips at some point or another when he was raging against psychiatry and how Scientology was going to destroy it. right? Back in the day. So it was very interesting to get, as a former member, the full breakdown, or a lot more breakdown, on who this guy really was. Because all we got told in Scientology was, oh, Jolly West, the guy who killed an elephant with LSD. What a knucklehead, right? What a dummy. That's the best and brightest of psychiatry, is kill an elephant with LSD. And that was it. That's all we had. You know, it's very interesting, that little information control.
Well,
And
yeah, you're going to talk to John, right? You should ask him about that.
oh, definitely. Yeah. I'm going to do my own podcast with him on this, because I think he's, like you said, he's just this wealth of knowledge you can't ignore. Okay. Now there was this other great story where you, pointed out the German government has just come out with a report of some kind and has Scientology on this list. What is this about?
Well, the reason why Germany is a little harder on Scientology than others is that Germany has this thing where they make an assessment about things that are a threat to their constitution, is the way they put it.
Mm.
And they have perceived that any kind of a totalitarian group is a threat to their constitution, which you can imagine why the German people would feel that way, right?
Oh, yeah.
Never again, never again, right? So they were particularly active against Scientology in the 90s. I didn't realize that they were still making this assessment. One of our readers brought it up to me. And yeah, it's a public document they put out, I think, on June 20th. And it's a long document about, neo-Nazis and all kinds of stuff that they consider dangerous to the Constitution. And at the very, very end, the last thing is a page about Scientology. And I thought that was really interesting, particularly because the way they describe it is so clear-eyed. It's like, look, this group thinks they're taking over the planet. In order to do that, they recruit kids. They put out these fake products under something called the Way to Happiness Foundation. I mean, bam, bam, bam. I mean, I look at that and think to myself, there are people in the US government that feel that way, that know these things, but the government itself would never say something like this. And it's really a shame because, part of what government needs to do is identify the threats. And that's what Germany is doing here, is identifying the threat. So I figured readers would want to see that. It's not a long document, not too detailed, but what it says just shows that German government just will not be fooled by the Church of Scientology.
That's right. I'd actually like to just read from one line of this, because it speaks to something I'd like to comment on, where their statement, and it's funny because they call them the ESO, and it's Scientology organization from the, in this document. It's not the Sea Org, but they keep seeing ESO. And they say here that the method is intended to create a clear. In Hubbard's teachings, people who are not clear are to be denied fundamental rights and human dignity. The Scientology organization sees itself as a ruling elite that should reign over the rest of humanity. Those two statements right there encapsulate all of it. It's truly the culture, the Sea Org, science of survival, and Dianetics, where it all started. So from beginning to end, it's all right there in two sentences. And those struck me when I read it, and I was like, yeah, I'm going to read those when we do our show this week, because that hit me between the eyes. Because it nails it. And it is for those exact reasons that the German government is absolutely right, that dogmatically the Church of Scientology is anti-constitution and is a threat to their democracy. They are not exaggerating the case.
Yeah, yeah.
So just for people who have questions about the German government, because it comes up often, on my channel. And finally, there was something I just wanted to note as a point of interest. I got into the Sea Org in 1995. And I spent 17 years there. And the day I got in and got through the boot camp, I arrived in West US management. And my job was to oversee the technical divisions of every Scientology church in the Western United States, west of the Mississippi. So if there were students on courses, if there were people getting auditing, that fell under my area of responsibility. And I did that for almost a decade. Then I did a lot of other jobs in Scientology. But at that time, my boss was a woman named Vicky Shantz. And I was just struck by the fact that in a flyer from a promotional piece from Scientology this week, there she was, same job, COO West US, the person who's in charge of the middle management function of Scientology for West US, Vicky Shantz. And there she was on stage, right? And I just was almost floored because I don't know anyone who's held one job for as long, than her on that post in the Sea Org. People tend to have very short lives in the Sea Org on a job before they're transferred or busted or moved in some fashion. And there she is still. And that's just worth noting for some reason for me. So I thought I would note that.
Well, that's cool. I get sent those by people that are kind of under the radar. They're still on the mailing list. And I like to post them just because it feels like it keeps a little watch on what Scientologists are being told, what Scientologists are expected to show up to, and that kind of thing. And sometimes I recognize the figures in the flyer, and sometimes I don't. But I'm glad that this triggered a memory for you.
Yeah, it was interesting, and only because I spent so much time with her. When people ask me, and somebody did ask me this today, and so this is where this actually, now that I'm thinking about it, this is actually where this comes from, is, what do I miss from Scientology? And I said the first answer out of my mouth was my old friends, some of my old contacts, people I used to know and actually care about, still to this day, and while the senior-junior relationship between Vicky and I for many years was not what I would call friendly, I never thought of her as an evil, horrible, witchy person. And she's one of the people I really desperately wish would get out. I think that might be where that's coming from for me. Yeah.
That makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah. Because I worked so closely with her for so many years, and in a way, I'm sitting here chuckling, but it's a rueful sort of thing. I'm not laughing at her. I'm bummed she's still there.
When you say that, the thing that comes to my mind is I had lunch with Corinne Powell at the Celebrity Center, I think in the year 2000, maybe 2001. And she's still in that same job all these years later. Corinne, come out. Come out, Corinne. It's better out here.
That's right. That's right. It definitely is. It definitely is. All right. Well, Tony, thanks for breaking all this down with me this week.
All right. Thanks a lot, Chris.
All right. And folks out there, as always, end of the show wrap up here. Subscribe to Tony at the website there on his Substack. Subscribe to this channel. Support this channel. Be a member. There's a join button right below there, or Patreon or whatever. Just show me some love. That all being said, I'll see you guys very soon. Thanks for coming.
Happy holiday.
Happy 4th of July.